Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 19, verse 38 to 42. It's a passage we could reflect on for Holy Saturday morning. St. John writes, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jews. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. That's from John chapter 19, verse 38 to 42, a passage we could reflect on Holy Saturday morning, the day after Good Friday. It suggests thoughts about success and failure. You know, Alexander the Great's conclusion to his siege of Tyre in 332 BC was gruesome. He is said to have personally taken part in the attack on the resolute city, fighting from the top of a siege tower. Once his troops forced their way through and over the walls, they quickly captured the city. According to Quintus Curtius Rufus, 6,000 fighting men were killed within the city, and 2,000 inhabitants of Tyre were crucified on the beach. The others, some 30,000 people, were sold into slavery. The determined Alexander succeeded. The valiant defenders of Tyre failed. Let that be a picture of success on the one hand and failure on the other. There are few things more common in the conduct of ordinary life than success and failure. One of the greatest religious minds of the 19th century, John Henry Newman, failed all expectations at his final exams as a youth at Oxford at the end of 1820, barely scraping through. He too had many experiences of failure. Well, on Holy Saturday morning, the gaze of our heart is on the beaten and blood-stained body of Jesus Christ, laying lifeless in the tomb in failure. The leaders of the Jews, or at least the temple aristocracy, had orchestrated their implacable designs on the life of the undaunted Galilean and had succeeded. He lay dead in the tomb, and that, they could expect, was the end of him. They could get on with the business of being the leaders, with their sway over the people now unthreatened. The pretender, as they called him in Matthew chapter 27, verse 63, had failed, and they had succeeded. Death meant failure. Life and position meant success. He was dead. They were entrenched in life. Now all this is true from the point of view of the world, which is to say, the natural and obvious view of things. Christ's own disciples viewed things thus. They were devastated. All had failed. Their master was gone. But Christ's failure in death revealed something entirely different. Repeatedly, he had told his disciples that he had to suffer in order to enter his glory. Apparent failure was the only way to the success which God planned. There he lay in the tomb, dead and defeated, humanly speaking. Satan had won out, so he, Satan, would have felt assured. The greatest threat to his dominion over the world had been eliminated. But how wrong he and Christ's enemies were. For in embracing the cross and his unspeakable sufferings, Christ had taken all the right steps. It was God who knew what were the right steps for doing away with the greatest problem facing the world, which was sin. John the Baptist's mission was to reveal the Messiah to Israel, and he had said of him that he was the Lamb of God who would take away the sin of the world. This incidentally suggests that John had an inkling of the path the Messiah would follow, that of a sacrificial lamb. But it was probably only an inkling, because he went on to speak of the Messiah separating the wheat from the chaff and burning the chaff with an unquenchable fire. This suggests a warrior Messiah of obvious victories over evil. John sent his disciples to Christ to ask if he really were the one that was coming, suggested that he was seriously baffled by the methods that Christ was using. What I'm saying is that the path God planned for the Messiah, who in the event was his own divine Son, was a complete surprise. It was the path of obedience amid immense suffering. It was the cross that mattered if victory were to be attained. That is, the bearing of the cross in the spirit of obedience. This failure is the path to ultimate success, hinted at in the Scriptures, but requiring the light of Christ to interpret it aright. Napoleon Bonaparte declared during his final years on the island of St. Helena, and let us note that St. Helena was the one who found the true cross, that the proof for him, for Napoleon, of Christ's divinity was the dominion he had over the hearts of so many. They loved him as a living person. The saints, of course, are the exemplars of this devotion to Christ as the Lord. They bear witness to his supreme dominion. But it is to be observed that their love for Christ shows itself in their close following of him, and this is shown by their embrace of the cross. As Christ embraced the cross, so for love of him do they. Thus does the cross stand revealed as the path to the only true success and victory, which is that of our sanctification.